welcome back. We weren't here last week, so this is, although it's the 13th week since we started, this is only the 12th video. I am clearly slacking off. But welcome, great to have you with us. And over the next hour, we're going to be picking up kind of where we left off, very much the same kind of format, and we're going to be looking at some more Bartitsu stuff for you this week. So hopefully you had a good week off, you've remembered to come back, and we shall crack on. So yeah, we're outside again, hoping the rain holds off for the next hour, otherwise I'm going to get very wet by the end of this video, so let's try to avoid that. So what are we going to be doing this week? Well, this week we're back to Kane again, and normally when I say welcome to these classes, you don't need to have seen anything previous. You don't need to have seen anything, but it would be very, very useful if you've had a look at some of the other Kane stuff that we've done. Particularly, there's two sessions that are worth looking at. There's a session on Vigne Kane, and the last time's session where we were looking at Cunningham. We're going to touch on those briefly, so it'll be helpful if you've seen them. It's not essential though. Because today we're going to be looking at a completely different style of Kane for the first bit. We're going to be looking at sheleighly, which is Irish stick fighting. And then the second half, we're going to be looking at kind of integrating the systems together a little bit, starting to explore some of that material. So that is our plan for the next hour. But we shall start, as we always start, by falling in. So we go to attention and fall in. I've gone to Vigne. I suppose I really should have gone to something a bit more sheleighly-like we'll be covering today. But anyway, we have fallen in, classes officially in session. As usual, go at your own pace. One of the reasons that I wasn't able to do anything last week is I have damage from my neck and my shoulder on my left hand side, so all of that's a bit dodgy. So you're going to notice I'm going to do very little with my left hand side, and I'm going to do a lot more on the right this week, whilst I'm recovering from that, okay? You know your own limits, you know what you can and can't do, so work at your own pace, okay? To be honest, most of this Kane work isn't particularly heavy going, so you should be okay with it. Okay? So, let's have a look at what we're talking about this week, sheleighly. Now, this is not a sheleighly, this is a Kane. One of the many pieces of kit that is on my wish list, but I've never quite managed to get yet, is a sheleighly, or at least a sheleighly analogue. Now, a sheleighly itself is a Kane, but it has two important differences, really. The first of them is one end tends to have a big knot of wood at the top of it, making it distinctly heavier at one end than the other. Okay, which we don't have here. We've kind of got it represented by this black fuller on the end here, but a proper Kane would have a giant knob on the end that you would be using for smacking people with. The second thing is, because it was made of a material called blackthorn traditionally, you'd actually have it with lots of little spikes, almost like if you imagine like a rose bush or something with the spikes kind of broken, so there's only like half of the spike left, but attached to a fairly solid chunk of wood going down the length. You've got some kind of idea of what we're talking about. This means there's a couple of areas smoothed off for the hands, so you have to be very clear about where you put your hands when you are using sheleighly. The other side of it means if I hit the other guy and scratch, not only is that going to hit him with the impact of it, any movement or drawing or pushing against the flesh I will do will open up cuts just by virtue of it being blackthorn. And if we get round to looking at things like getting it around somebody's throat and grinding, you need to understand that this isn't just a chokehold, this is physically impaling them on tiny little spikes. So, when we come to look at sheleighly, it's not really falling into that self-defense category in quite the same way. If you're using an actual sheleighly, you are seriously injuring somebody. Okay? However, a lot of the techniques will work with a straight Kane that we use, and that's where we kind of bring it in. The reason that we look at sheleighly is, obviously, sheleighly has nothing really to do directly with Bartitsu. But Vigne, who we do use a lot of his material, and we've obviously done a video on him before, he complained bitterly about having to fight against sheleighly fighters, and advocated learning sheleighly in order just to deal with shillelagh fighters when you come up against them. So we kind of look at it from that kind of point of view. How do we, from one point, we should know the style, how would we fight against it, and the only way you can learn to fight against something is if you have a basic understanding of it yourself. Secondly, in the spirit of Bartitsu, is there any good techniques in there we can nick and use ourselves? And the answer is yes, loads. And that's really what we're going to be looking at. So for the next kind of 20 minutes, we're going to look at what I would classify the basic moves. Now, shillelagh tended to work in families. The particular family style we'll be looking at today is the Doyle family shillelagh, which is by far the most common. But be aware there are other types of it, and also it is a very complicated system that's been generated over generations. I'm not going to attempt to teach you all of that. I'm just going to show you some of the basic movements to give you a feel for it. So when we start looking at shillelagh, we always start looking at footwork. Front foot pointing at our opponent. You'll recognise the stance from literally everything else we do. Kind of a shoulders width back, half a shoulders width out, turn at 45 degrees, bend the knees. This is a really good stance for pretty much any martial arts or weaponry you're going to be doing. Now in terms of the hands, rather than Vignay, where we have the cane up here, or Cunningham, where we have the cane more down here, this time the cane comes up across the chest and we hold it with both hands. This is actually one of the stances that Cunningham uses, but it is our standard go-to stance for shillelagh. We will very rarely leave this stance for long, okay? Now, we have the shillelagh, or our stick, cut roughly into thirds with our hands on those points there. Both hands in the same orientation, knuckles facing the ceiling, and then we bend those together. So we're trying to push this middle bit. I'm essentially trying to push that into the camera there towards you. The reason being there is if I'm doing that and I take one hand off, it automatically flicks out. So I'm putting it under tension to build kind of potential energy that I'm going to unleash when I actually come into doing an attack. So that is our stance. Okay, whichever foot is forward normally will be the hand that is forward. So I adopt a right-handed stance most of the time when I'm fighting shillelagh. So my right foot is forward and my left foot is back. Okay? So that ends up slightly forward, I tend to find, although a lot of the manuals will tell you it should be straight on. I tend to end up a bit more like that. So, there is our stance. The first attack we need to look at is really the equivalent of a jab. Now, a lot of shillelagh has the feeling of boxing. So if you're familiar with boxing or pugilism, a lot of the feeling will be the same, but the techniques are kind of quite different. So what we're actually going to do is, from our tense stance here, is we're going to throw out a straight. Now a straight, or a jab, comes off our lead hand, okay? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to release it, as I said before, so that's already throwing it away from me. And I'm going to throw that straight out so that the cane bounces off my forearm, okay? Now I'm not trying to bounce it off my elbow, because that's going to hurt, okay? I'm not trying to bounce it off my shoulder or anything weird. It bounces off the forearm. So it comes out and connects with the forearm. You can see that? Comes out, connects with the forearm. The reason for that is it's going to bounce off my forearm. Hopefully, it's going to bounce off the other person's head about here. Okay, that's great. Bounce, and it comes straight back to me. Bounce off their head, comes back to me. If it doesn't make contact for any reason, I don't want to end up over here, because I'm suddenly unguarded. So what I want to do is get used to that bouncing off my forearm and coming straight back. So I can throw those out quite quickly. Yeah? Okay? And that's our basic jab, which is normally go into our opponent's head if we can at all manage it. You know, but if there's a hand available, or an arm, or even, you know, a kneecap, whatever is available, that's what we're going to take, and we're going to hit it with that. Okay? Out. Contact the forearm. Back in here again. Now, obviously, if we've got a jab, we've got a cross. Okay? So normally in boxing, you'd have a straight cross combination. We have exactly the same thing. So there's our straight. It comes back. We fire off into the cross on the other side. And it's exactly the same technique on this side as far as the hands are concerned. Okay? So there's our straight. There's our cross. Now, the footwork is important. Because if I start here and do a straight, I have the distance of the cane, but really I want to get more. So I'm actually going to twist my hips and push this hip even more forward. So from here, twist, I'm going to bring my lines in, hips in line towards where I'm attacking. And the difference is, you can see that's my normal attack, that's my twisted attack. I'm gaining an extra kind of almost half foot on my range. So that's how I'm going to strike that way. Now if I want to strike with the other side, I'm really short on that attack, yeah? Compared to this hand, which you can see is almost touching the edge of the screen, I'm not even halfway there. So what I'm actually going to do is twist my hips. So if I'm facing you guys again, that one's coming in and the hips come in line there. When I come back, when I push the other one, my hip comes through and my feet cross. So I go from here to here. Strike, push my hip out that way, back, out, hip goes that way. So I have those options to gain that extra range and more momentum. And the more snap I put in the hips and the more I fire out that cane, the more potential energy is in that cane, the more of it damages my opponent. Okay? That is your straight cross. That is your bread and butter attacks. Okay? In the same way with boxing, straight cross, jab, jab, cross, all of these kind of techniques are going to be what you're throwing out all the time. These are your equivalents for shillelagh. Okay? There are, of course, two additional moves we're going to look at, which are the uppercuts. There are two versions. One is quick and not as dangerous, and one is very slow but very dangerous. So we'll look at both. The first one, instead of firing the cane sideways here, I'm going to twist and bring it down and upwards. So from here, again, in order to deliver this one, I'm actually twisting my body away a little. So from here, but again it comes round and connects with my forearm here. So I can throw out an attack, come in with an uppercut, uppercut, oh I missed it, I missed my forearm that time. Uppercut there, straight, cross, uppercut, okay? It just allows you to change that angle, okay? So rather than coming in sideways, we can try and aim for the chin, the stomach, between the legs, whatever kind of target is available. Now, that's fine, but if we have the opportunity, we want to wind up for something a bit bigger. This is where it gets more fun. So we have a straight, a cross, and at this point, rather than bringing it back, we're going to drop it and pass it to the backhand. Okay? Straight, cross, and then drop it down and pass it to that backhand. Straight, cross, and then drop it to that backhand. The reason for that is, once we've done the straight, the cross, dropped it to that backhand, we can unwind all the way with the giant uppercut. Yeah? And that is a proper, underneath the chin, all of the force, that is a knockout blow, okay? It is slow, but it is a game finisher, okay? So it's worth having it in your arsenal. Okay, so now we have 4 good attacks, yeah? Straight, cross, small uppercut, big uppercut, okay? That's fine, we can now attack, but it's worth knowing how to defend, okay? Shall I do defense? No, I'll finish the attacks first and then we'll look at defense. Really, there's only 3 more attacks that we're going to look at, okay? The next 2 that I really want to look at are your thrusts, okay? We've looked at the kind of what we'll call cutting attacks, If you're used to a bladed weapon, those would be cutting attacks. Your thrusting attacks come slightly different. Okay, the first of them we're going to look at, hand drops down to the waist, and we thrust forward on that kind of low line from rising from my hip into stomach, solar plexus, genitals. That kind of low line prod. So from here the hand drops and thrusts forward. Okay? You're never going to do it like this. We're always going to run it off another technique, which I'll show you in a little minute. Okay? So from here, drops down, thrust forward. And obviously I can do that to either side. I can do that from that backhand as well, which will become relevant in a minute. The other thing we've got to be aware of is the high line. So this time I'm going to raise the cane up almost into our kind of Vigny stance and drive that over the top. Now it tends to come with a slightly arcing motion, and I'm coming into the face, the throat, solar plexus over the top. And again, there's nothing to stop that being done with the other hand. I'm just not using that shoulder at the minute. So, those are our thrusting attacks, okay? The only other one we're going to look at is really a two-handed shunt, okay? Now obviously, the small attacks we're using all the time, our little uppercut we're using all the time, we've got a big uppercut if the opportunity opens to end things. The thrusts change the line. They again allow us to hit somebody. The problem we have is if somebody wants to get in really close, we can end up kind of almost with the cane trapped in between us. So the other technique we have is a kind of roll back and push. So we'll take the cane and we'll roll it back towards our body and then thrust it out forward. Okay? So we're going to roll that down and then thrust that forward. Roll it down, thrust it forward. Now the reason for that is the roll down doesn't really matter. We're just pulling it in close. The reason for the roll down is if somebody grabs me. If somebody's got in and already grabbed me, I bring the cane above their hands and that roll down goes down the front of that forearm and it digs into the bone at the top of the forearm here. Yeah, which causes a lot of pain and hopefully encourages them to let go of me. So that little roll there is an extra, almost like purring the shin, which we've talked about before, this kind of scrape down the shin with the foot. This is purring with the cane on their forearms. Okay, so we're releasing some of the tension that they're holding us with. Once we've done that, we're going to put a little drop step or a thrust in with the cane into their chest, into their face, just to make them back off a bit. Yeah, you're too close to me, go away. Okay? So that gives us our options. We can keep them at the direct distance we want. We're not going to let them get in close. And then we're going to hit them with our little attacks. Wait for an opportunity to really smack them one. And occasionally prod them just to keep them again at a distance we want them to be at. So those are your kind of core attacks. Okay, there's loads more we could go into, but that's the ones we're going to look at for now. In terms of defense, it depends where the attack is coming. And really, we're only going to look at 5 quick defenses. Okay? The first of them is what we'll call the high right block, if you want to look at it that way. Going to my right hand side, or your on side, however you want to refer to it. So from here, the cane comes across to my outside. Now, unlike fencing or something where you want to move in a straight line, if you imagine almost a beach ball kind of attached to your crotch, okay? My hands are on the top of the beach ball now. They slide around it to come into the block. And that can be done on either side. So if there's an attack coming in on towards this side of my head, I drop into it as I go round that beach ball. Okay? So that's your first set of ones. The next ones are the kind of low line ones. So obviously if there was a thrust coming in towards my face, that's going to catch it. So the thrust coming in lower than my cane, this does nothing. Okay, so I need something that defends this kind of area and my legs. So from there, I'm going to imagine this time the beach ball is attached to my face, and I slide round it in this direction. Yeah, I might quite happily drop that a bit lower if the attack's coming in towards a leg. But you have these kind of blocks here, okay? There is another block that's used for the legs where you drive the leg and drop this down at the side. I'm not going to cover those today. They take a bit more dexterity and stuff, a bit more teaching. For now, we're just going to look at these quick rise ones to the side. And if there's something coming in low line to on the center, either of these will catch it and move it offline. The other one we're going to look at is obviously an attack might come down straight on the head. And for that, all we're going to do is we're going to raise the cane up a little bit. Okay? Again, not all the way up. I don't need to defend 3 times my own head height. I just need to get the cane up above my head. And normally I'll duck down a little as I push it up, just to keep me out of distance of anything. Okay? So now we can look at how we string these together. Now, as I said, the thrusts, if I wanted to thrust, I'm going to drop it down to my hip and push forward. I'm never going to do that. What I'm going to do is do a block round my beach ball, which puts me in the position to deliver that thrust. So yeah, it's just like, nah, sod you, take some damage. Okay, likewise, I'm going to slide up, and now I'm in the position to deliver my high line strike. So I'm going to deliver those a lot more off my parries than I am off straight attacks with the thrusts. Okay, so I attack, I block, I thrust, I come back, and I attack. Okay, so that's kind of how shillelagh works in terms of its core techniques. Now there's lots of other stuff in there. You've got ones where after a low line thrust you can bring the cane up and then smash it into the face using the other hand. If they get in closer, you can use these kind of paddle strikes really in close. I mean, there's a whole host of other stuff in there. We haven't looked at anything involving the butt, but what I'm trying to do is give you the very basics of a system. Okay, you can block the head, I can block to either side, and I have a nice little range of different attacks that I can deliver in against my opponent. Okay, so if you just have these core techniques in mind, you have the basics of shillelagh, and you start to get an understanding of the feel of shillelagh as well. How are we doing time-wise? Cool. So that was really what I wanted to cover for the start of it. I'm just having a quick check to make sure I haven't missed anything off that. No, it looks like it. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with shillelagh, okay? Now remember, these would be heavier, and you'd normally carry it with this holding the furthest away from the knobbly end. So these jabs are all coming in with that extra weight, okay? When I'm passing this back and doing that, it's coming through with that extra weight, yeah? If you want to have an imagination, if you're not familiar with it, imagine doing this with a hockey stick, yeah? Or something of that kind of ilk, where I've got a weighted head at one end. That weighted end is being fired out. That weighted end is coming through with the hook. The weighted end is falling and adding more power into that strike, okay? So bear that in mind. If you can get hold of a blackthorn at some point and have a shot of it, you'll see how different it actually feels. But there you go. That is your basic Doyle family shillelagh, okay? The only other type of shillelagh we look at, there's a style which has a guard up here. Slightly more awkward style, but it allows you to box as you would do normally with the occasional extra strikes in. We're not going to cover that again today. We're just looking at the Doyle family, and that's been kind of a very basic introduction. Hopefully, watch that a couple of times, you'll have most of the ideas there. So, we shall take a slight break from me showing you stuff for me to ramble. And this week, it's kind of show and tell. Because for the next few weeks, for the rest of this month, probably in the beginning of next month, we're looking at what we call improvised weaponry. Now, I was very adamant for a long time that the idea of teaching improvised weapons was some kind of insane lunacy. The idea of being able to teach something that is improvised seemed like an oxymoron to me. That if you want to teach somebody, teach them a weapon. You can't teach somebody how, or you'd have like a billion different styles. Like, oh, this is my broken bottle style. This is my, offhand beer mug style. I was wrong, okay? And over the years I've come to realise that. So what we actually do now, quite embarrassingly, is I teach a lot of my syllabus is based around improvised weaponry. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So what we want to do is have a look at some of the way we do that, okay? And the way we do that is through what we call archetypal weapons, okay? So rather than having a style for using a walking stick and a broken pool cue and I don't know, a crowbar, we'll have one style that encompasses all of those. So we have about 6 or 7 archetypal weapons, and the idea is you pick up one, and it doesn't matter what you pick up any implement and go, ah, it is a bit like A, and at that point you don't have a fighting style, but you have a few tricks, okay? All of your rest of your training will kick in, but you then have a few specific tricks, some basic attacks and some basic defenses with whatever you've picked up, and then you're able to use that to defend yourself. So what I'm going to do for the next kind of 5 minutes is just quickly run through what we consider to be our archetypal weapons. And the first one we'll start with is what we call long inflexible, which is the cane is the archetypal weapon for that, okay? Long and inflexible, the cane. And we can use that as a Vignay style, or we can use that as sheleighly, or we can use that as Cunningham. Any of these different styles we can use, okay? So we have the cane. That also covers something, as I said, like crowbar. Okay? Crowbar, little heavy for doing Vignay, really slow, but when you want to put it into something like sheleighly, and I can fire out that kind of hooked end, that's not stuff we covered this session, but those kind of grinding thrusts, uppercut becomes particularly deadly, although it makes a little bit of a wind-up. You have those kind of options available to you. Moving down in scale, we have the short inflexible. Okay, this is an Indian club, a very, very small one. Very different kind of weapon. Yeah, trying to use this as a cane would be kind of pointless. We tend to use this much more held back in reserve, and what we're more likely to do is kind of box with our lead hand and use this as a finisher. Or, actually, we base a lot of what we do off early American police truncheon manuals. So predominantly Irish again, police officers in New York had a fantastic manual where you do things like catching an arm and then digging the cane into the kidneys and controlling and moving somebody along. So it can be very useful for controlling people or for just adding an extra bit of weight as a multiplier in to your finishing blows when you want them. Other implements that cover with that, a stout bottle would probably cover with that. One of my favourites is a hammer. Don't use it that way, it's really heavy. Tend to use it that way so that I've got something quick to hit with and the added extra weight for the knuckle dusters if I need it. But you know, those kind of short weapons there. And that's a couple of the inflexibles. The next ones we're going to look at are the flexibles. So this is the short flexible or the kosh. Okay? Now, in one option, we use it very much like we do with the baton, the short and flexible, in that we'll fight and use it once we've got our opponent somewhere. We just want to add that extra attack in. Okay, this would work equally well. Traditional half brick in a sock, orange in a sock. Any of those kind of things work well for this. But it does allow you to do random other sneaky little kind of attacks when people aren't watching, and it wraps nicely around a lot of blocks and things. So short and flexible, really nice. Again, little extra you can add in there. Moving further on, we then have our large or long flexibles. In this case, a tie with a stress ball in it. Now this is actually not an active weapon as such. I'm just creating an area that it hurts you to walk through. And that area is between you and me. If you want to walk through me, you get hit by this. Okay? So that is your flexible, long flexible. One of the common things we'll use with that would be a belt. Okay, this is just a standard kind of webbing belt, double D-ring kind of connector there. Once I've got that up to speed, it becomes a relatively intimidating weapon for somebody to actually have to walk through to get at me. And if I need to, I can, well, if I can remember how I'm doing this, I can add in extra power with little flicks and quite happily control that. There, so that's long, flexible. Going further and further and further and further away, we come to our two-handed inflexible. Now this actually, the archetypal weapon we use for this is a bayonet. Okay, this is my rifle. A lot of these demonstrations are things I do at Steampunk, so this is my Steampunk rifle. If you like it, it was made by a guy called Daniel. I will put his link. He only does commissions nowadays. He used to have a shop, that's kind of closed, but he does commissions, so if you want Steampunk stuff, he's a good man to go to. I shall put his link in. But in terms of what we're looking at here, this would be a knife on the end of a rifle barrel. Yeah, and we use this down here. A lot of thrusting. We can do these kind of large blocks. We can step in and use the butt of it. But most of the time we're controlling that space in front of us, almost like a spear, and then lunging forward. Okay, why would we use bayonet? The main one that this comes into use with is pull cue. Okay? Pull cue, the kind of stereotypical barroom brawl weapon. You see people pick it up, they smack it over somebody with almost this big two-handed sword. It snaps and is useless. Okay? Its strength is in the length of it. So if we use this much like a spear or as a bayonet, I can deliver a lot of powerful thrusts and keep people at range as I'm using it. So, pull cue is our long two-handed. The last one I'm going to mention today comes from even further ago. This is a half cloak, and it comes from my fencing days. But the way we would use this is we would look at what we call a two-handed inflexible, two-handed flexible rather. So for this, I can use it. Distraction makes it very hard when I'm doing kind of waving this through to know when an attack is coming through. Yeah, or even if I'm throwing it and following it with a strike. Okay, I can tense the bit between my hands, and I can use that by almost snapping and pulling it so it goes tense. I can use that to aid in my blocking, and obviously if I can block, I can potentially wrap things as well. And there's nothing wrong to be said with just throwing it as an obscuring shield behind which I will charge. Now, obviously not many people carrying cloaks these days, but a hoodie or a jacket works just as well. This is just a standard fleece jacket, and I can do all of that swirling, blocking of punches and things with this. So we would use coat as another one of our archetypal weapons. There are some others we use, but they're less common. So we pick up some buckler techniques, and you can use that with a beer glass or a tankard. Trying to think of other examples. I can't off the top of my head, but we have, broken bottle would be used for knife or something. We don't generally teach people to attack with knives because it's really bad to be in a knife fight, and you certainly shouldn't be the one instigating a knife fight. But this is how we look at things. So we have these archetypal weapons. So if I pick something up like a chair, what is a chair? It's not really one-handed, so we're down to two. Is it flexible? No. But I can't really use it like I can a pull cue. So I'm probably going to end up using it much more like I would a coat. I'm going to use it to obscure my opponent's view. Yeah, I'm going to use it to entangle them with the legs. And I'm going to move around. So as I said, it takes a little while to get into the mindset of picking up anything and going, what's it closest to? And then I've only got to know 5 or 6 systems of like a few moves and a few defenses. And it means whatever I pick up, I can use it to make me a better fighter in a self-defense situation. And that's really what we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. And we started really by looking at it with Cane. It's one we use more, we probably put more emphasis on any of the others because it's the stereotypical Bartitsu weapon, but all of the others we'll be covering over the next few weeks. Okay, that was a little show and tell on Bartitsu improvised weapons. So we're back to Cane now. And what I really want to do now is look at something we started to talk about when we were talking about Vigne Cane. Okay, we've started looking at this idea of being able to do double blocks and then it not really mattering which hand that I come off these attacks with. Okay? The idea of this being, it makes it almost impossible for my opponent to guess what attack is going to come. Okay? Because if I block here, it could equally well be trying to defend anything coming up on that low line or a high line or anything coming from my right hand, but equally anything could be coming from my left hand side as well. So it increases the options. That's good, but we want to increase that even more. So what we want to be able to do is not just go from this position, I can launch into several strikes from the same system. What we want to be able to do is every couple of moves switch to a different cane system, which constantly keeps them guessing what on earth the next attack is going to be. So what I really want to do is just pick up a few transitions from one style to another so that you kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. So the first one we're going to look at, we're going to start from our shillelagh guard we've been looking at today. We're going to assume an attack coming in on this side, so we know we're going to use that kind of roll over the beach ball block on the right hand side. Okay? So there's our shillelagh block. And from there we're going to go into a high line strike, so we're just going to go over the top into a shillelagh thrust. Okay? Block, shillelagh thrust. Okay? Textbook shillelagh stuff. From there, we're going to switch it and we're going to go to Vignay. So we block, we do our high line thrust, which as you can see is very close to our Vignay guard, and then from there launch into a tick and a tock and back to our Vignay guard. So we start in shillelagh, finish in Vignay. Shillelagh, 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 Vignay, Vignay, back into a Vignay guard. Okay? It's just changing suddenly the tempo and the style and where those attacks are likely to come from. Yeah? And the more we can do that, the better. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Where am I going next? Right, yes. So we're going to start off again in shillelagh, and we're going to do our straight, cross, pass back, and our big uppercut. Okay? Straight cross uppercut. Okay? It's like one of the basic combinations in boxing and pretty much every other style you come across. Straight, cross, pass it back, uppercut. Straight, push the hips out, cross, push the hips out, pass it back, uppercut. Okay, but rather than then pulling that across to return back to my guard, I'm going to let it continue into what we'd call a moulinet. Yeah, if we were doing any of the kind of fencing techniques. It's come up here, I'm going to let it cross as if I'm painting a big X upwards. Okay? We'd call that, in our case, for most of our styles, we would refer to that as a false diagonal up. It's a diagonally upward strike coming from my false side or my off side. So, straight, cross, this is still shillelagh, passed across, this is shillelagh, this is back to Vignay, and it brings us back to our guard on our high guard here, that high guard here. And from here we could tick-tock, we could go into a thrust, we could go into an overstrike, thrust through, we'd be back into a more Vignay style of fighting. Okay? So shillelagh, 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 Vignay. And it just keeps them guessing what's coming. Okay? Fluff that one. Why can't I get that one? Sorry. As I said, struggling slightly with my shoulder. I'm going to take it a little slower. There we go. Back in there, back to guard again. So those two, we've looked at starting in a shillelagh guard, and we've ended up in a Vignay guard. Halfway through our string of techniques, we've switched from one system to another. We're going to try and do that the other way around now. So this time let's look at something more Vignay. Let's switch those two around, I think. So what I'm going to look at is my Vignay stance starting here. And I'm going to start with a tock. I know normally we would start with like the tick-tock movement here. I'm going to start with that attack into the other side. From there, I'm expecting them to block and then come round for a hasty block as I move round into my tick. Okay, so I'm just, again, they'd expect me to start here. I'm not, I'm starting on the other side. and then I'm coming around this side, which I know they're expecting. So I start this side, I come round, and I use that wrap shot we talked about. So rather than finishing this way, as I come over, I flick my wrist round, go around their block, and try to bing that cane into the side of their face, back of their head. Okay? That wrap shot. That's great. If it doesn't work, my cane ends up across here, and their cane is right here in front of my face, and I get hit in the head. So what I'm going to do is, after I do that wrap shot, if it fails, rather than just letting it swing through, I catch it, and I'm straight into my shillelagh guard, so that I have that double head block that I've got ready for, you know, whatever they decide that attack coming down, and from there I can block straight into my strikes back to their head to keep them on guard, as it were. So, starting from Vignay, I attack there, I come round for that wrap shot and miss, straight to shillelagh, I've got my head block, and then I'm straight back applying the pressure to them again with my straight crosses from my shillelagh. So I start in Vignay, moving to shillelagh. Another good one I like from starting from Vignay is I'm going to block across the body in a low way. So this would be, if you're used to something more like sabre, this is blocking in a fourth, down here. And we've looked before where we do this kind of hook and step motion around. If that makes no sense to you, go back and watch the Vignay session where I explained it all. So block, hook and step, so we're moving their cane offline, we're hitting them in the face, and we're gaining ground, okay? That's pure out of our Vignay textbook. Block, hook and step. From here, I've got my high line thrust that comes in again, but I'm going to let it roll over a bit because I'm transferring now. I could just ram it straight in, a very Vignay style, but instead I'm going to roll it and let me start changing to shillelagh. Okay? So, block, wrap and step, and that quick hit in here. Now they're quite close to me at this point, so I'm going to come back to my shillelagh guard and use my thrust to push them back. As they're going back, I cross to the face, straight into the back of the head. Okay? So I'm keeping that pressure on. I block, step, hit them across the face once. Hit them on the high line again. Hit them again, moving them away. Hit them in the face, hit them in the back of the head. Okay? And it's done really quickly, okay? Because when I'm actually doing it at any speed, I think I missed out the push there, sorry. That is a lot of attacks after they have tried to attack me. Okay, but I start in my Vignay, block, strike around, transitioning into shillelagh, and then I'm into pure shillelagh by the end of it. Okay, so it's that transferring from one system to another. Got two more examples, just hopefully to kind of fill it in a bit, looking at something a bit more outlandish. Let's say we're starting in our shillelagh guard. You should be very used to this by now. Rather than looking at the upwards block, let's say we're looking at a downwards block, more kind of here. So somebody's coming with an attack either towards my groin or into this side of my hip. There's my block. Now this is not a million miles away from here, where we looked at Cunningham last time, 2 weeks ago. So what I'm going to do is when I get to here, rather than coming back to my guard, yeah, I could go for a low line thrust, I could go for a high line thrust, I could just come back to guard, but what I'm going to do is instead turn my hand over and use what would be the back of the blade in this little strike up that we talked about when we looked at Cunningham, this kind of false edge attack. I always think of it as false adriti because I train side sword, but it's using a kind of pushing your hand up and then flicking with the wrist. Again, go back and watch the Cunningham if you're not quite sure what I'm on about. High line attack, turn the wrist a little, and I've got that very quick flick up. It's not going to do a vast amount of damage, but it's really going to distract them. And it also puts me in a lovely position to hammer straight down on the head. So I, up here, shillelagh. Twist Cunningham. Cunningham. Back to my shillelagh guard, or indeed I could let it come down and rest in Cunningham. Okay? But in this case, let's say block and shillelagh, Cunningham, Cunningham, back to shillelagh to see what's coming next. So I'm twisting it from one thing to another. Okay, let's look at one more. Where am I going? we're going to start with the system here where, let's say I'm going for my traditional tick-tock from Vignay. Tick-tock. Which is great, but let's assume my tick gets blocked and my tock, quite frequently, if somebody has caught the first one, they'll duck under the second one and come up at you in close range. Okay? And they're in your face. So what I want to do is, I've done my first attack, my second attack misses. I'm going to let that swing round and come up into an almost boxing guard with the cane over my shoulder. Okay? This is just a different style of shillelagh. So from here, block, block, round to over my shoulder. From here, as they're coming up close to me, they get a jab of the pummel in the face, which sends them staggering back a little, and I'm just going to flick that over. You'll spot that connecting with the forearm again. As they're going, thrust to the face, over the top to the forearm, swing back round again, and back into my shillelagh guard. So I start in Vignay, tick, tock, miss, go round into shillelagh number 2, jab, over the top, swing round back into Vignay, and end in Doyle style shillelagh. So I'm actually going through 3 different styles there. Okay, so I start in Vignay, tick, tock, it missed, goes behind me, jab, strike over the top, attack back round, and through into my shillelagh guard to carry on the fight.
We've got a question, Duncan.
Yes, sure, absolutely.
You're being asked, where did you learn Doyle?
Where did I learn Doyle? I learned Doyle partly from several Bartitsu seminars I went to, and a couple of shillelagh seminars that I went to. None of them taught by people who are full-time shillelagh instructors. And the rest of it I have got experimentation through reading material that I've been able to find. So I am not in any way putting myself out there as an expert in shillelagh. Okay? If anybody does any research, you'll find that a lot of shillelagh people are either charlatans or very closed about it. It's still taught very much as a kind of almost secret family style. And there are groups out there that teach it. All of them teach it slightly differently. A lot of them claim to be teaching Doyle. But certainly where I've learnt it all has been from other people like me who have taken an interest in it through Bartitsu. Hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, you can have a look online. You can find a lot of people who teach it. You'll find a lot of what I'm teaching in very much in the kind of videos and stuff that you can find on YouTube. But no, sadly, I have not managed to travel across the island and learn from the masters. I sadly have too many other things I'm trying to learn. Maybe one day. I'm never ruling it out. I'm still hoping to go over to China and train with Shaolin monks at some point. But that's was in a completely different past life. But, you know, it'll get there eventually. For now, where were we? Yes, shillelagh. I was going to mention, have I got time? Yeah, a few minutes left. I'm going to introduce one other concept, and this comes really from more modern-day Neo-Bartitsu experimentation. And we're taking this idea of not knowing what's coming one step further. And we're going to use a really, really weird guard. Instead of creating the tension by pushing our hands out, we're going to drop it down behind our kind of bicep there, catch it underneath, and I'm pulling both forward. So it's under tension, but now that tension is around my arm. So if I let go with my bottom hand here, all of that power gets transferred as it swings over the top. Likewise, if I let go with the top, all of that power comes with the other hand coming underneath. Okay? Now anybody who's watched any Kung Fu movies, which I admit I was brought up on, you'll be used to this kind of nunchuck movement here. We're going to use that with the straight cane, but what this allows us to do is with that tension here, if I need to block something, I have blocks downwards by coming over this way or coming straight this way. Likewise, I can block across here, I can block up here. So depending on where I need to block, I can let go with either hand, okay? It's that idea of being able to use both again, okay? Also from here, straight over the top attack, straight upwards attack, but there's nothing to stop this coming sideways and back as well, okay? And it allows us to move the cane around a lot between different styles, okay? So we can start in Vignay, go for an attack over the top. Everybody's expecting a ta-da. Well, what about if you pass it back and then come with something sideways from the other hand? Twist it back, then you've got your uppercut from Doyle, back to shillelagh, and you're back into your striking. It allows you to do really nice stuff as well. If we were back into our other shillelagh style, you can bounce it across the top, pass it underneath, and come up between the legs, which isn't something that works from this style because my body is in the way for any kind of upward striking. Yeah? But dropping it down and moving it through with the other hand opens that option up to me. Okay? It's not something I'm going to go into a great detail with, but it's an extra little trick you can add in to link your different styles together. Okay? So I can quite happily start from Cunningham up into a quick attack. It's already coming round behind my arm. From there I can attach, sideways across, up into my Vignay stance. Straight over the top, pull back, and I'm back into shillelagh. Switching through these gives you the chance for your opponent to never know what's coming. Okay? They can't attack you effectively because they don't know where the openings are. They can't defend you because they don't know what you're about to throw. They can't predict anything. And if you keep it fast and flowing and the pressure constantly on them, it's very hard for them to do anything against your onslaught. Okay? And that's what we want even in a self-defense situation. If you've got a walking stick or something, you can just shower blows upon somebody. They're not necessarily going to be killing blows, okay? Ideally, these are all going to come in lovely precision and all the rest of it, and you know, and kind of dislocate kneecaps or whatever, which is great for that kind of one-shot takedown. But in reality, if you just keep a flurry of blows going against somebody, they will yield ground, and that buys you time to look for something that's actually going to finish them off. Okay, so that's how it kind of builds into that self-defense kind of technique. So we have looked at shillelagh, given you a basic introduction to Doyle-style shillelagh. We've also looked at that transitioning of different cane styles. So hopefully you found that interesting and hopefully useful as well. Next week, we're going to be moving on to starting to look at some of the other improvised weaponry. Particularly, we're going to be looking at the flexible styles next week. So we're going to start off looking at Kosh, very kind of close range, flexible weapon, what the pros and cons of that are, few kind of tricks you can use, and then we're going to move on and spend the second half of the class looking at belt, or this long flexible. What can I do when I've got a bit more range? What are the pros and cons? How do I have to use that to be effective? I know a couple of people have asked me for this because I ran a seminar on this kind of stuff down at BartitsuCon 1, I think, so it'll cover a lot of that same kind of material. So we'll be looking at that next week, so hopefully you'll come back and join us again for that. Hopefully the weather will stay off, because I really don't fancy trying to do long flexible in my kitchen. I will trash the place. Other than that, if you have any questions, just like was done today, you're welcome to post them up as we're going on, and I'll answer them live. If not, post them up there. I'll try and come back and I'll answer them over the next kind of couple of days or whatever. Or message me or phone me. I'm always willing to talk about stuff. Always happy to talk about martial arts. So yeah, get in touch with me and talk through stuff. Right, other than that, I think all that's left to do is to fall out and finish up for today. So I will start with we'll go try and remember to do shillelagh this time rather than anything else. So from attention and fall out. Okay. Well, it was great having you guys with me again today. Hopefully it's been a good session for you as well. And I will catch you next week for lots and lots of twirly death with flexible weapons. Until then, you know, take care of yourself. It's a weird time. We're starting to ease out of this lockdown period. Nobody seems to quite know what's going on or who to believe about how much is safe. Overall, always play it safe. General self-defense rule that works at every other part of your life too. Okay? So keep yourself safe, keep yourself entertained, and above all, just be kind, because there's real shortage of that in the world right now. Okay, take care. I shall see you next week.